Well. You're listening to Gloves Off with Professor Buitrón. Alright then, I may say words on point, straightforward. No jibber jabber, everybody forward. Issues, facts and solution. Get it at Gloves Off with Professor Buitrón. Alright, what other thing is a revolution? Get it on point with Professor Buitrón. Gloves Off, no nonsense issues, politics, community. A better men follow reader. Gloves Off, a revolutionary show with everything that you need to know. With Professor Buitrón. Watch ya!
Back at you, Gloves Off. I'm Professor Buitrón, and I have a great guest, one of the luminaries of a martial art that is being preserved and brought forth to the world. And the Gurdev Nidar. How are we doing today?
Great. It's nice to be here in London now, so it's nice weather here. So not as hot as in Texas probably, but it's nice weather.
But you know, yeah. What's the weather like? Is it hot right now, or is it kind of?
It's good. It's about 24 degrees, nice fresh air, and it's nice weather, comfortable weather. It's not hot, it's not cold, it's not wet.
Here, yesterday we were 108, which is what, about 42?
Yeah, that's India style weather. Probably dry heat though, eh? Is it dry heat?
No, it's like a microwave. You just go inside.
Okay. In England, we had like yesterday we had nice 27, but it was humid, like 43% humid. So we feel a bit more. Humidity is the killer. The heat is up there.
No, here it's not. Here we don't have it. Just burns right now. And when we go into August, you're going to start seeing a lot more of that. You know, you have humidity. September.
In England, it rains basically every other day, like here. So you know, weather's always like this. We're lucky to have a bit of summer now.
Well, Gurdev, there's a couple of questions we've always talked, and it's always great to hear from you. But let's talk a little bit about how you got involved with your art, and how did you find out about it, and how did you get involved?
Well, in 1984, I went to India. I was 16 then, and my great grandmother. So I was born in the UK, but when I was 5, I went to India, and I stayed there for a good while, like until I was about 10, 11 years old. I came back. So my great grandmother, she was 100 years old plus, and she wanted to see me. Well, she thought she was going to go there. So I went back at the age of 16 or something, and then I just stayed there. And then we have a local festival that carries on there nearby, and I went there. And these kind of local festivals, people, villages from nearby, they all contribute. So someone does this, someone does that. And our village that day was serving food. And I went there, and by chance, I met an old Nihang master. He was talking in the corner to someone under the trees, a couple of guys standing next to him, and he's obviously discussing something. As I went nearby, I caught the tail end of the conversation, and he's discussing martial arts, fighting, and so on. And as the conversation ended, he looked around, he saw me, and then he just beckoned me over here. I went over to him, and he basically said, "Do you want to study the fighting arts of your ancestors?" And I just said, "Yeah, why not? I got nothing better to do. I was pretty bored in my home, my village." And next day I showed up, and that's how it all began, man. And the first day he had a stick prepared. He had a stick with him. He says, "Here, take a stick and hit me." Now, he was in his 60s plus, late 60s, but that day he told me he was in his 80s. And he pretended to be old and so on. He's always like that. And he goes, "Hit me on the head." And I was hesitant, obviously. I was 16-year-old, I don't hit the old man. And then he sort of said, "If you're your father's son, then you would hit me." And then that got me a bit, okay. So I went to hit him, and before I knew it, I was flying. He just threw me. He just latched on too much, called kinetic energy, transferred his mass. The next thing I was throwing. And after that, I was hooked. And then I would go basically every day and train with him. It was not far away from my village, about 20 minutes scooter drive. We'll go there, start training with him, and then like this, almost 11 years went by. As simple as that.
And, after your 11th year, you went back to England. How was it that you brought the martial art and taught others that there is a martial art in India? And
Yeah.
how did the other martial artists actually accept it or not accept it? Or
So when I came, so I studied Gurdev. So I studied the whole system, which includes not just the martial skills, but the history, the traditions, the philosophies, and everything else and so on that goes with it. Then about 11 years later, I ended up in the UK. But at the beginning, I just set up in my own community. I didn't spread out and so on, because the art is a subtle art. It takes time. Now, traditionally, it only takes 2.5 years to study the proper art in terms of the fighting skills. But you got to look at this. The 2.5 years of training is like 10 to 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I was training 10 hours a day. But I was studying the whole history tradition, so that takes a bit longer. And as a consequence, was the average student in the West will train to about 6 hours a week, and then you got to work and or study or school, whatever there. And so it's not the same way of training as traditional training you'll find throughout the world, like that they would have this focused training, like the knights of old, or in India, the Kshatriyas, or the samurai in Japan, and they will do it in a very short time, like 2 years' time, but it's like total dedication, nothing else going on. So after about 10 odd years, in 2000, let me show you, I came back in 95, about 2007, I was invited to a martial arts show by a guy called Gokwan. His background is Filipino, Salat, and Goklan, so his names. His name, and Salat, Filipino, and Jeet Kune Do, the Bruce Lee art. So, and one of his students, so one of the guy's associates, he was studying with me. And through him, got to know them and so on. And eventually, so he came over and he invited me to his martial arts show and so on. But I explained, look, when I demonstrate live blades only, not with the fake blades. So if you can compensate that, and then that'll be fine. Like, and eventually he said, yeah, fine, coming down. So I went down, and as soon as I got there, for the first time, I came across really martial artists who were dedicated martial artists, like proper martial. We've been doing that for like 30, 40 odd years, and were serious martial artists. So martial arts world, as you know, Paul, is divided into, you got the exhibition lot, then you have the self-defense lot, and then you actually had the actual traditionalists, then you have the combat lot. So this is a traditional combat system. And as a consequence, it was the combat martial artists, like from Jiu-Jitsu, like Mark Moore, Patomali from the Filipino arts and so on, Kali, and others like that, Brian Jones, etc. All these guys who were senior in the arts, when they saw what Shastarvidiya was, then automatically there was mutual respect, and we got talking, sharing. So Indian martial arts is not well known. I mean, funny enough, a few years ago, I was in Ventura with Cold Steel, and Danny Santos' daughter came in, Diana. And she even spoke of how Bruce Lee in the 60s went looking for the Indian arts in Bombay. One time on his trip to Hong Kong, he stepped off at Bombay and he went seeking for the Indian arts. So the Indian arts have always been, so in the background, most martial artists are aware that the arts there's an influence of Indian martial arts and the Eastern martial arts in particular, but no one's really seen it to 100%. So even when you talk about, things about this Bajra Mushti in Gujarat, which is influenced, which are like Knuckle-duster fighting, which is sort of a mixed fighting type, but no one's really seen it. So Shastarvidiya was unique in that sense. It's one guy describes it like a dinosaur walking out of the jungle, suddenly you saw a dinosaur. And that day, first day, very impressive. And I had a karate guy come to me and say, look, I've been doing karate for 40 years. And there's a movement in my kata, which we don't have the meaning for. I think you used the word bonkai or whatever. So we don't know the meaning of this. And today you're showing it. I was showing Kalika. And that was nice. And that way we got a lot of respect. There's a Mark Moore. He at the end is a ninjutsu guy, 13th Dan. And that day I was showing very subtle stuff in Mahakal. And we have a concept called Shunme Shun, which is basically, Shun means void. So Shunme Shun is void within the void. And funny enough, with Mark, he stated in our system also, in the Japanese, they have, if I pronounce it right, they have it called kukan or something like that, which is void in the void again. So a lot of things when the martial arts were doing, and later we got talking with Kotorishin Turu and so on. So there's a lot of things which just connected. And that day I decided to just show the higher stuff. I said, I ain't gonna show the basic stuff and all this. I'm basically angling for all top martial artists, the guys who knew what they were doing. So I ain't gonna cater for the idiots. Leave them to it. So the higher stuff was shown. There's one technique I showed where you hold a blade like this. It's like this. It's hold it like this and you hold it like this. And so when I showed this, it looks very flimsy because it doesn't like this. But in reality, what I'm doing is I'm bracing. I'm here, bracing with the thumb, fingers, and then I'm hooking the finger here. So it's very strong and it's extremely dexterous. And it's just meant to pin as you cut down with the other sword. So it's in the left hand doing this, and that cuts down and so on. So these kind of delicate stuff and so on went way over the head of the average martial artists there. But the ones who are from the advanced Chinese systems, the Japanese systems, Filipino, they recognized. And that way we got a good rapport. And in the years to come, we'll do seminars with Mark Moore and Katamali and so on. And so it was with the Moore, and it was good. So I was happy for the first time. Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody always knows that. Always says, especially the Chinese and in the Japanese systems, that Buddha Dharma brought it from India and crossed it over to Shaolin and et cetera, et cetera. When I was in France and I was teaching in France, in the school that I was teaching, ISPTT, which was a rec center for the postal workers, the doctor was from India that gave all the physicals to all the boxers of Salat, right? Yeah. So one Sunday I came in there because we were training and we're preparing for a fight. So we were training in the bottom, and I heard clanging in the top, like, and people moving around. So I went up and I started looking, and he invited me, and I sat down, and they were doing an art called Gata. Where does Gata come in? And we've talked about stuff like that, but express it.
Yeah. So Gata and what we call Shatur, they are two distinct traditions. So one is a Kshatriya Indian warrior tradition, and Gatka is actually Khatka, Kutka, Khut from the region of Turkmenistan. So in the 11th century, you had invaders from the central steppes of Asia who invaded India. And Gatka is their art. So Gatka is more of a tactical art than actually a technical art. So there's a distinction between the practitioners of Gatka, the people from the steppes, they're the nomads, and then the Kshatriya, they're the sedentary-based ruling classes. So throughout, like in Europe, you have the Huns, who were then what's called the nomads who invaded what's called the Roman world at that time, European world. And then you had the Mongols invaded called Japan and so on. So all these, in the nomadic culture, their main weapon is their bow. So what they did was in ancient battles, riding on the horses, fast mobile horses, using horse archery, they will unexpectedly attack an enemy. Thin him out with first shoot their bows and thin the enemy out. Then they'll rake through them with their lances, and only as a last resort they will dismount with their swords, which are pretty clumsy, fine blades, but pretty clunky and so on. Surround the enemy, and then cut them down. Gatka has that kind of mentality. So Gatka, where Kshatriyas, the Indian warriors, the Shatur, they're more like European knights or the samurai in Japan. These are like a warrior caste, and they pride on their individual skills. And they fight duels. They come up in the battlefield before the battle starts. These kind of battles are fought in formations. They'll come up, these warriors will ride out, and they will challenge each other. They'll announce their lineage and all this, and who they are, what they are, and then they'll fight a duel within bound and so on. So skill-based and duel-based. So that's the main difference. So Gatka is actually from Turkic origin, where Shatrudya is from the Kshatriya origins. And whereas Shastarvidiya itself is non-muscular, in Chinese terms, be internal art. So we don't use the muscles and so on. So technically, it's far more advanced, in that sense of the word. Whereas Gatka itself is very muscular, but the advantage of Gatka is it is far easier to learn. You could teach large numbers Gatka very quickly, whereas Shastarvidiya in its pure sense, it takes years for them to get that to that level and so on. Although in India, there's also arts called like Pattabadi or Prattabadi, which are basically village arts. So in India, they distinguish, just like in Europe is what they would, the kings had no interest in arming the populace and training them to the same levels of skill as their own armies. I mean, there'd be revolutions all the time. Like. So as a consequence in India, you have Shastarvidiya, which is seen as a royal art. So they wear armor, they wear chainmail. So if you wear armor and chainmail, you're going to move in a certain way. So we spill our mass and so on. Whereas the peasants didn't have the access to the same weaponry, nor were they given the same training. But also the reality is the peasants are farmers. So they're going to keep the economy going. So they can't train to the same extent as the warriors. They're going to plant their crops and harvest, etc., and so on. And the kings don't want them to the same time. So these two arts exist. So Pattabaji, when Gataka came over, he amalgamated the village arts with the village arts. So in modern day Gataka, you'll see this particular footwork, which is like 4 steps. And otherwise, it's very similar to the arts of stick fighting you'll find all the way through to Libya and the Middle East. But those 3-4 steps are unique to India, which are also found in Shastarvidiya. But in Shastarvidiya, they form, those 4 steps are just one set of movements out of the basic 30 movements. Whereas in Gataka, that's all the movement that there is. There's nothing more, just those 4 steps and so on. So simply, Gataka is Turkic origin, the Mongols and so on. And Shastarvidiya is the Kshatriya. The Kshatriya are the equivalent of the knights in Europe, who have centuries of tradition and so on, and strong sense of honor and all this and so on, where these guys are nomads. So it's a different mindset altogether. So one tradition they describe, so the Kshatriya they liken to a tiger, and the Gataka they liken to the dhole, the wild dogs. The wild dog will surround a tiger wherever in the jungle, and they'll nip at it, back at his hamstring him, and then try to cut him down. Whereas the tiger will pounce upon him individually and so on. You can take the alpha out and so on. So the mindset is different altogether. Between Gataka and etc. Think of a knight and think of the Huns. They're nomads and the sedentary based Kshatriyas and so on.
Absolutely. And that's interesting. That's an interesting concept because those are actually the way they used to fight.
And you got to realize also is like, if you look at the Mongols, they actually say their origin story in the Book of King, whatever, is through the wolf. So their mentality is like a wolf. Pick out of the herd, look at the weakest, chase them down, and then surround him and hamstring them and disembowel and so on. So it's not a question of which is good or bad, because Gataka tactically is fantastic. It works. And for that, the nomads were pretty successful against the sedentary-based kingdoms, so on in China and Japan, and Europe, and so on. But same again, then Shastarvidiya is that, like knights of old, they were trained for skill-based. And whereas Shastarvidiya now, as I've been taught, we marry technique and tactics together. That's the similar there. But so a point came in India where after the 5th century, so India, after about 5th century AD, they began to cut themselves off from the rest of the world. They began to see the rest of the world as being what's called barbaric, Malays and so on. And that's when the Huns invaded, the Sveta Hun, the white Huns. And then that was a bit of a shock to them because they came in. And so the Indians came to a certain level in, like I say, about 3rd, 4th, 5th century, cut themselves off. And then 2 centuries later, they got invaded by the Huns and so on. And then the Huns will then rule India for northern India for a long while. Absolutely. So this hit and run techniques eventually get amalgamated with Shastarvidiya as well. So they like 2 enemies, and eventually they learn from each other. That it happens. We human beings, we adapt, and we adopt.
You have to. Absolutely, you have to. You're gonna have to learn You're gonna have to learn what your enemy does to fight him.
Yeah. If you can't, you're gonna just copy him at the beginning, then adapt to it and so on. And that's what happened in India. But Shastarvidiya, interesting. Shastarvidiya's core principles are Vedic, based on the Vedas and so on. So all the tradition, its techniques, when they're passed down through the centuries, they get wrapped up in mythologies and so on. It's the package, and then they're passed that way. So conceptually that way, and in terms of science-wise, it is very sophisticated and very precise, just like in India. So in India, you go now you have the Vedas. So the Vedas are a particular scripture which is extremely old, or 5,000 years old. And to this day, you have Brahmins who can recite them perfectly from memory. And for centuries, 1,000 years, they were just recited through memory, and eventually they were written down. But even now, they're still memorizing them. So the Sanskrit language is very precise. And Shastarvidiya is like that as well. It's art of Jhatka. Jhatka means like killing instantaneously. So they have little things like, if you move your hand from here to there, they will count. So the point where you started to what it ended, they will fast count. It's 1, 2, 5, 6. 1, 2, 5, 6. And they'll count every movement you make. They'll make this kind of understanding of timing. So if he takes you a count of 3 to do some movement, they want to do it less than that. take channel 1. Eventually, they want to make the pure skill is that when from point of start to the end, that transition is gone. When it comes completely non-telegraphic, just like tigers, they want to be non-telegraphic in movement, completely concealed. That's the whole aim of Shastarvidiya.
And that is something that you brought out, the word that many forget, telegraph.
yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Every time you train, you want to be less telegraphic, and people get mad when you tell them, and especially in the ring, the less you telegraph, the better you're going to be. And you have to train it.
Yeah, but the thing is, like sportsmen have to be almost like showmen to some extent as well, like to demonstrate. So there's an aspect of Shastarvidiya there that they would have these formal duels. Like, so when it comes to actual combat, you just dash in, get off line, superior tactical position, you chop your head off. But when they had duels, so in the ancient days, when they were just before the Muslims came to India, ancient days, 2 Hindu armies would come, and most of the kings were related, just like in Europe. So they're not really interested in killing their own cousins and so on. So what they did was, at the beginning, to settle matters, if it's a minor land dispute, like over a village or two, they'll just have their wrestlers, their court wrestlers they would have, and these court wrestlers would just wrestle it, and whoever wins, they get the village or whatever. But if it was a bigger dispute, they may decide about duels. And before the duel started, they have all this movement, so warriors will express theirs. They first have to recount their lineage and who their granddad was and blah, 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 this, and so on, the house of this. And then there's a particular ritual kind of dance-like movement, that dance-like movement demonstrates your finesse, your sense of timing. And you can look at them and say, look, that guy his movement is non-telegraphic. He can move from here to there without you even seeing it. So what's he going to do when he has a sword in his hand? So those dance movements, and each of these dances have particular all the postures are related to Hindu gods and goddesses. So that's a ritual. So there's an element of show and ritual, but this is dueling. And they will always pick the guy who's tall, strong, handsome, because he represents your nation. Like, you're not going to send a little small, scrawny guy who's like not so good to look at or so on, and people are just going to make fun of him, because that will happen in the battlefield as well. Like. So you're going to send someone who will showcase your whole nation. So all the knights have to be like the best. If he's too ugly, they make sure his face is covered, like they can't see it. Nice mask on him, so on. And so the dueling aspect does have this art aspect to it, the dance movement and so on. And then when the actual combat starts, but it's funny enough, the higher levels in Shastarvidiya, they look like classical Indian dance. There's a particular dance of Shiva called the Dandav, which means a dance of destruction. And that dance has come from the martial traditions, and they are very micro movements. So if you miss by that much, or you miss by that much, it's still a miss. And they want to just, rather than evade blows, they want to just slip. Just slip the blows and make it non-telegraphic. And they're aiming to kill, incapacitate with a single blow. In reality, they've got 3 blows. So unarmed combat tradition with armor always ends up in a grapple. And the grapple is always terminating. Just like in European manuals, you see that there was grappling. But Shastarvidiya, they'll go past all that. The body, they won't bother. There's no grappling with the body. It's just going straight over to the neck. That's the end. They're warriors. But in a duel, they're not necessarily trying to kill the opponent. They want to dominate him. And then if they got him in a position where they can kill him, they may just hesitate, be magnanimous, and show that we're morally superior to the. And many times they maybe even relate to each other, fighting. So they had that, even on the battlefield, when 2 armies fought, the aim was not to kill everybody, it was more to rout the enemy. Because once you rout them, it's easy, and because killing like large numbers of men human beings are not designed for that psychologically. That has a lot of psychological effect. And if you kill one side's man, his family members, his nation, are not going to be really happy with you, and so on. But if the enemy is routed, it affects the whole morale of the whole nation of the enemy, because you can't go home and say, what happened? We lost, what happened? Oh, this is Iran. I'm so scared. So the aim was to rout the opponents, and in a duel, to subdue the opponents and to show that you are superior. And it's all about getting in their heads. That's what it was. So sometimes you could have your best warriors go in, and if my best warriors went into a duel and they all lost, then the morale of my army, you're going to think, shit, these are our best guys, and they just got whooped. So they had that. There's a lot of psychological elements to the Shastarvidiya element as well.
Absolutely. That's interesting. That's interesting to see, because you saw it with everywhere, especially in the posturing. Then the uniforms came in, the posturing came in. You saw it with Napoleon era with the big old hats and so on and so forth. So
yeah, so and not just the physical appearance, they would have notions of how they're dressed. So sometimes a lot of Indian warriors, they will have their faces covered like this when they fought. So the soldier, you can't tell because they become like almost then like faceless warriors, because everybody's dressed like that, and they have a blood mark there and so on. So from the way their uniforms were, and a lot of the ancient battles nowadays we've got radio communication systems and so on. The old days it was your basically drummer boys and trumpets and all these instruments that orchestrated the battle, the tempo and so on. And so that was very important. You'd be surprised how important your drummer boy was. To a soldier. Like, I mean, battles couldn't be fought without these magicians and they're in the background, they're playing. They couldn't fight battles because there are like conch cells with blue, that means get ready for battle. There are like these horns, particularly said now advance, go left, go right, whatever. So they orchestrated the battle through these musical instruments and so on. That's why a lot of the ancient warriors, they were pretty well skilled. They had a good ear for music. So a lot of them were versed in good music, classical music stuff. And because of the movement, swordsmanship, dancing and stuff was there as well. Because the classical dances informed their understanding of movement. And also classical music, if you listen to things like Bakavi, now the classical Indian drums, the tempos of the music is such, their rhythm and so on, it basically elevates your understanding of timing. If you just listen to this, and that's the tempo of that's your timing, and it's complicated. And once you get the understanding of tempo or movement, that's how they do it. They'll see your opponent, sees movement, and they can figure out the timing. You're just going to be quicker than the other person there. Get there first. Not necessarily quicker, just be smoother in movement.
Absolutely.
Things like fast is slow, smooth is fast.
Absolutely. Now, it's also weapon-based art. What's the differences between, let's say, the swords from India in comparison to the swords from Japan or China or Europe?
Okay, so the closest swords to India, are the Persians. Like, say, take the Persian sword now. So again, Persian, their art is called khataka in the past, which is basically gata. And again, they're cavalry-based. And their blades, our ancestors actually came from Persia. So they're linked ethnicity-wise as well. So the Persian blades are very fine blades, super Damascus and so on, but it's their handles which are different. They are much more clunkier because they are designed to chase a opponent down on horseback and just swipe or cut them down and so on. Whereas the Indian hilts of the blades, if you show me some, get a blade there? I got a sword here. I'll show you. They're designed for any sword, whatever you want. Just bring 2 or 3 blades. So these kind of hilts, they are not grasped like this. They are basically just held delicately like the fingers, braces like this. And so I can dance them, move them and so on. And as a consequence, the Indian swords, because of the hilt, we can take the blade from Persia, and the Indians would buy blades from Europe as well. And they would attach Indian hilts to them. So it's not the blade, it's most of the hilt. Once you have the hilt, then you can dance with it, maneuver with it in certain ways and so on. And again, so the Indian swords are famed for their draw cut. And most Europeans understood that they mentioned is that they have a draw cut. A draw cut means you hack in and you draw the whole body. But there's another cut, which is far less known, but which is far more popular with more advanced forms of Shastarvidiya. So we use a draw cut where we hack in and then draw, but there's also where we hack in and then drive through. So driving on the body back, so the person as he falls back cuts himself and so on. So you hit him with our mass and our kinetic energy, and then we drive through them. So driving through cut and draw cuts are 2 forms of cuts we use. In Gatka, they only use draw cuts, whereas in Shastarvidiya we use both of them, and so on. And so they have different types of cuts. There's cuts which are mainly for armor and chainmail, so where you have to hack into it to break the chainmail and such. And then the other cuts were just for flesh only, for heavy curved swords, where we just place the sword on them and then drive will go through like. So different types of cuts and so on. So depending on the type of cuts you want, so the Japanese swords, so they were not really known. I mean, the first Japanese swords that actually came were in World War II to the Punjab. So Sikh soldiers who fought the Japanese in Burma with the British, they sort of brought, just like the Americans did, they brought some samurai sword back. And the samurai sword, funny enough, there's a particular sword in Persia, and in the Punjab it's called Sandeka. It means the ox cutter, because they used to decapitate oxes with it. So that's the closest we get to that kind of shape of blade there, and it has Persian hilt onto it, so on. But otherwise, the Japanese swords are not well known. The Chinese, not really either. Some of the Burmese swords from Daos and so on, they were known. The Sikhs and the Chinese did come to conflict towards Tibet in the 19th century and so on. But sure, none of the Chinese blades seem to have come across and so on. To Indians made it so on. But the Indian swords are known mainly, they have a sword and they have a small shield combination. So they always use it with a small shield to block, swords specific for cutting and so on. There's no tradition of blocking sword and sword. There's a tradition of you may interrupt someone's sword. So before the enemy sword swings in, you may push in and interrupt it so you don't take the full blow and then cut. It's not that swords are weak, but they have understanding that you don't want to damage your swords and so on, which most martial arts in the world have as well. And so we also combine a lot of guitars, like these punch daggers and so on. So they may use them in combination. You might have two more blades like this, shield. So they use a variety of combinations with the sword and so on. So different types of swords. There are khandas, which are straight swords. So there's over 250 types of swords in India. So where can I start like? And they all have a slight different way of, it's like musical instruments. They have a slightly different way of playing. And so there's a lot of variety. It's interesting, in the martial arts shows I went to all those years ago, in 2008, there's a Kotori Shinto-ryu schools, which are Japanese schools, one of the most ancient ones. And in the Japanese, they have at the most about 4 or 5 types of swords, they said. They have this big, large sword, I forgot what it's called, for when they're on horseback, and they have the katanas, and then they have the wakashashi or something they call it, I remember that, and there's a big sword they got. But 3 or 4 types of swords, whereas in India, you'll get about 250 types of swords. So that's the variety is different and so on. And it's on your imagination. They didn't care. The kings traditionally would, after a battle, collect all the weapons they could. Because no king wants to leave those weapons riding about so people get hold of them. Okay? So once the enemy has been defeated and been disarmed, those weapons are collected, their armor in particular, advanced, and they're put in the royal armories and so on. And the people are not allowed to just pick a sword and take it home. It's forbidden. The kings do not want the populace to be armed. So swords are collected, and when time of battle come and they call for auxiliaries from villages and so on, then they will probably give them, even then, the average villager just fought with almost like a pitchfork and a spear and a club and so on. They were not given Damascus or quality swords. There's no point, they'll just break them. They have no skill to use them. So they're given axes and clubs, but the weapons could be shared out amongst the skilled warriors and such. But the individual warriors were well known in India to get their own kind of blades designed and so on. They want to have their uniqueness and so on. So there's a lot of types of swords you'll come across in collections nowadays, which are very unique. And you think, hang on a minute, this sword, this type, so someone just had inspiration, they made it and so on. Sometimes the swordsmiths will make this and present it to a warrior and say, look, this will make you stick out the rest of the guys and so on. So they have that kind of understanding. So swords are variety types. Straight swords, so
great history, and we're it's just mind-boggling that now that you're preserving it and pushing it out there, hopefully everybody grasps to it and understands that it's here and it's moving forward and can make it.
Yeah, I've just written now 3 books on it, and these books hopefully by September will come out. And there's a history of the school I belong to as well, because the school I belong to is from 1661, and the art I do is like 1,000 years old. And so these books are now being brought out, so people can study them in English. And there's an app coming out as well in September, so just so people can get around the world, look at the art and so on. But like I said, the art itself in Taxila, so Taxila was an archaeological dig now in Pakistan side, and Taxila was an ancient university. And it existed at a time when Alexander the Great was around. So Taxila originated around the 6th century BC and it lasted for about 5th century AD before the White Huns came and so on. And the interesting thing here is at Taxila, so we had Alexander the Great in 3rd century BC come. And even before that, so at Taxila, it was an ancient university and it attracted teachers and students from around the world. So nowadays, we look at the world and there's borders and all that. In the old days, there's no borders. So if someone from Greece heard that there's an ancient land over there, there's a king who's sponsoring scholars, they travel. So at Taxila, you had influences from Habish, which is basically Ethiopia. You had it from Sham, Syria, places like that. You had influence from Persia and so on. So and Greece, of course, because Greece dominated that area at that time. Greece and even China, Western China. So all these influences came to Taxila, and that's why when we look at the swords in India, like the Shastarvidiya swords, there are some swords. There's one called Seth, which is very Romanesque, and there's other swords which look like European type swords and so on. So there's a variety of swords here. Which, like I said, there's one called Sandekat, which looks like it's actually from Arabic origins, which looks like a samurai sword. But so the variety is phenomenal because it's a melting pot. So there are teachers there, they have students there from all over the world, like teaching at the time, and they're taking that knowledge. And from Taxila, the art then travels. So, like you mentioned earlier, Bodhidharma, like when you say Bodhidharma in Punjabi, it translates as Buddhist religion. So Bodhidharma is not a person. So the Bodhidharma would translate in our language as being the Buddhist faith. And Taxila at the beginning was a Hindu place founded by the nephew of Rama. And then in time, when Ashoka came, so on, became a Buddhist. So in India, religions are not so split. So Buddhism and Hinduism for a long time, they coexisted. So even now, if you go to India, you'll find same temples with Hindu deities and Buddhist deities, and they all mix, just like in China, Japan, and so on. What we had there was a mixture going on. And from Taxila, because Taxila just sits right at the bottom of the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road that came from China all the way to Persia, and it just sits right underneath there. And from that route, they travel. So, I mean, I know there are traditions we speak of from South India, the art's going that way, but in Northern India, they feel like Taxila is the place that where the Buddhists came. We know that because the last two descriptions of Taxila are actually given by Chinese travelers from China. So the Buddhists came there, they studied there, and with them traveled a lot of knowledge, a lot of science and so on. And of course, when the arts travel to any country, any nation, they're going to take in their own form and so on, adapt to local circumstances. So it's interesting, when I was teaching Shastarvidiya, and we have a student of mine, Fred Bilgardi, he does Salat. And I was showing this particular, we have this particular, it's like 8 sticks we put on the ground, and it's like a sport, like a wheel, and you move around it. And interesting for him, he says, in the Salat world, they have a similar thing, or exactly the same, basically in appearance, they call the spider's web. Whereas we call it like, they call it Ashchakra, the 8-spoked wheel. But the interesting thing is, it's associated with a goddess, and the goddess has this particular touch, which is a non-resistive touch to control, which is likened to a spider hand. So there's a similarity, and same with the Ninjutsu guys. So the Ninjutsu guys, Mark Moore described a particular Ninjutsu deity who rides a chariot. He's known as Krishna, and he's pulled by wild boars, which is, again, in India, you got Krishna, and the wild boars are Varha, so on. So there's a lot of cross links coming on, and a lot of Chinese tradition, they have a story of the dragons, and they trace it back to the Nagas, and the Nagas were the ones who ruled Taxila. So there's a lot of these elements coming through and so on as well, which are linking. But unfortunately, I found nothing going towards the West so far. Like, so all the links seems to be from like Indonesia, Malaysia, Japanese, and Chinese, Thailand, and Burma, and so on. And towards the West, there's nothing going even far as Persia so far yet, like, which is linking with them, like so on. Maybe in that world, I tried looking at it, see what goes that way, because because we have Greeks, we know the Greeks are there, and Greek artwork, even Indian astronomy that we have in India now is actually Greek astronomy. It's the Greek text that are translated. So the Greeks, the Yunan we call them, their medical system, their astronomy, and their artwork as well survived in India, but the martial links, I haven't found any. Maybe there's some Greek martial texts out there which may talk about it, or we haven't come across anything yet.
If it goes far that back with the Greeks, is there any type of Greek weapons designs that were left behind?
No, so the weapons we have, like, so for instance, the famous weapon, like the Greeks, they have that, like the koki type blades, which are like a koki's inward cutting song. You know, the Greeks had that kind of blade again. And so the koki kind of blade that we have in India, that kind of blade is associated with Nepal, the Nepalese and so on. But the Greeks also, the Greeks had a similar kind of blades like that as well, inward cutting. So the question is whether the Greeks, when they came out, did they leave that particular blade design behind, whatever. But then again, there's types of swords we get in India. So there's different types. The straight sword is the most ancient type of swords we get. Swords which are like leaf-like shaped. And then there's inward curving ones. There's double curving ones, like in, out, right? A bit like the early sickle type of swords that you get in, say, in Egypt and so on. So we have those kind of swords in India as well, like the sickle type, the dowels and so on. And then the curved sword again, the curved sword. So normally they associate the curved sword like this one here, like Tulwar, coming through the Middle East and so on, or with the Turks more so, because in the Arabs they had straight swords. But then again, the gods and goddesses are associated with after the 5th century. Like, so with the sword, it's very difficult to tell what particular shape. I mean, they can make straight swords, they can make inward curving swords, and so on. I mean, what does it take to make this kind of sword as well? Like, so this could be from the steppes, but mainly from the pre-Islamic period, coming up the Huns in particular and so on. This is perfect design for cutting back, horseback cutting and so on.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of history, there's a lot of room for history to be explored yet.
Absolutely. In every art, you know, history. And you have to understand the history when you're training, and the teacher has to understand the history, if the reality history, or is it something that's been fabricated, you know?
Yeah, well, they have, so you have history, like in terms of, so we have like pre-history, that's actually actual history, but then along with it, you'll have mythologized history, which is mythology. So it's like they ask the question, is it, what's more important, who you actually are, or who you actually believe, or who you believe yourself to be? So what you believe yourself to be and who actually you are, they're just as important in some ways and so on. So we have this parallel, in Shastarvidiya we have this parallel, we have the history side of it, then we have a mythology side of it. They don't parallel. And sometimes they converge and sometimes they separate. They don't separate as such, but they seem to like stand at odds with each other, so on, the history, so on. But it's there, like, but the mythology is there because this is the belief system they have. So for instance, there's a mythology, so everything in the past is, in India is going to be mythologized. So like the origins of the sword, okay? So historically we know that the sword appeared in the Bronze Age, and historically, archaeologically, they know it probably somewhere in Mesopotamia, somewhere around there. But in India, they have this myth where the ancient gods get defeated by this particular demon, etc., so on, so on. Then the gods hide out, and eventually Hashem come out. And then the creator god, Brahma, then does this great sacrificial fire, and from there emerges the sword god. And that's the first sword, and technology and so on. So they have it mythologized as opposed to being actual history and so on. But what we do now, these are very ancient myths and so on. So they have mythology, how it's like in Greece, ancient Greece, it's more, everything is mythologized than recorded in proper history. So you have to learn to decipher that and see what kind of content that is. So is there any substance to it or whatever?
And they all, and if you go into that world of mythology, they all kind of, there's some parts in there that they're the origins and the gods, they kind of cross.
They're very similar. They're very similar. Like, I mean, with the, like for instance, there's a story of how mankind were just animals first, and then a bolt of lightning hit Benares, the city of light, which is famous, the most ancient, believed to be the most ancient city in India. And then that fire was kept, and because we had fire technology, that made us advanced and so on. So nowadays, the Sul, the trident of Shiva, represents the bolt of lightning and so on. So the hearth that the fire sits in is the female organ, and then there's the male organ, and they have all this. So fascinating mythology is very extremely fascinating, but it's the way how people think of themselves to be like so on. Yeah. They're not necessarily literally true, but they have. But a lot of things are similar. Like in the Bible, you have Noah and his flood, and in India you have Manu and his flood. So be surprised that, and then you have all the ancient gods from, say, Zeus in the Greek world, or Odin in the Norse world, And then Indra in India, all the top guards have a thunderbolt as their main weapon, like, which is basically a spear of some sort and so on. So there's a lot of so there's myths, these are myths.
Of course.
I mean, considering all humanity is one family, they all came from, we're all human beings, all interconnected. So for instance, like in Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, if you look at there, all the representation of male figures there, the busts and the heads, are African and so on. So Harappa, Mohenjo-daro is basically a non-Vedic, and so that ties in with science as well, that this culture was African. So even now, if you go to the Andaman Islands in India, you have tribes there which still don't have fire. And they are Australasian tribes, like African Aborigine type tribes. So they're the early Indians. I mean, sometimes I get in trouble with the certain fundamentalists in India and who like to claim everything's from India and just magically appeared and so on. And we can't trace everything back to Africa or other places and so on. But there's a lot of human beings. Where there are human beings, they mix. It's simple as that.
That's the way it is.
And the art is the same as well. Shastarvidiya, in its origins, in Taxila in particular, we know that for sure that there's influence from different nations there. Because Taxila was a great university. It is mentioned by Buddhist sources and Hindu sources, is well known. So for instance, in the 1920s, when they dug the swords up, there's an archaeological dig there, and when they dug the place up, they found swords, and the swords were Roman type. So we know the Romans were having trade. And there's also ancient texts that you speak of Taxila, which has a heavy influence of the Byzantine Empire. So they actually mentioned that. So they're aware. So in India, Rome is known as Rome. So they know about Rome and so on. So they're having that influence going on. So you're surprised.
Yeah, of course.
How mixed it is.
And things, fight, if you're a fighter, if you're a pugilist, and you like to fight, and you see a technique, you're going to search it out, and you're going to ask that person, let me see it again. And you might even learn from that person, and then incorporate it and move on.
Yeah, it's like humans, the most successful human beings, like warriors. Hang on a minute. Oh, guys, come back. There's a battery low on this. Hang on a minute.
Hey,
cut off.
Came back.
Yeah, it's going to plug it in, the battery went a bit. Yeah, we human beings adapt. And as martial artists, if you don't adapt, you die, as they say. Which is this is the most this is probably the most common saying to most all combat martial arts: adapt or die. Simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't adapt, you die.
Yeah, if you're just an exhibitionist and you're just a showman, it doesn't really matter if you adapt. But if someone's going to smack you on the head, and you realize his method is better at smacking you on the head, you got to adapt to it. That's why in Shastarvidiya we have 10 fighting styles. 10 fighting styles gives us more versatility. The more versatility you have, the more you adapt.
Absolutely.
So, and then in Shastarvidiya they also teach there's a word called adaptation, which is the word anukulta, which means to adapt. But there's a concept called pratyankulta, which means counterintuitively adapting. So it's not good enough just to adapt. You need to counterintuitively adapt. Because a true warrior is a clever warrior. They're smart. So that's why if you look at all the ancient combat martial artists, they're into classical music, into artwork, into writing. They're smart people. Even now, like if you read proper martial artists, they're smart people. They're different to, like in India, they speak of Indian wrestlers. They say the Indian wrestlers have their intellect in their ankles or their knees. They're not smart because they're wrestlers. But with the martial artists, the Kshatriya, they're seen as sophisticated individuals. So they use the word we call, you don't want to be a warrior, you want to be a Sajjan Sura, which means a noble warrior. And in order to have nobility, you need that intellect, understanding, and so on. How to discern what is. So in order to be a fighter, you got to know what you're fighting for. And in order to know what you're fighting for, you must be able to discern what is right and wrong, what is truth, and so on. So as a consequence, in a lot of warrior traditions, if you look at them, they all have, like in Persia, they had the sword and the pen, same as India, sword and pen, Japanese, the same, or Chinese. In the West as well, all the knights of old, they get classical education alongside their fighting traditions. And because you can't, otherwise, because your intellect is not developed, so the music, like in Shastarvidiya, we say, like classical music develops timing.
And you see that now, and you see that with generals. Generals are sent to military schools, and they're taught.
Yeah.
It's very rare to have a general now come up from the ranks. He was a private, and he went up all the ranks and became a general. It's very hard now. Now you get, and like in Napoleon's times, they went to university.
Yeah, it's same. So they're well read, they're smart, they understand. So they know how they're diplomatic, they can talk to people, they can galvanize people and work together. So the same. So in ancient warriors was exactly the same. I mean, if you get an ancient warrior from ancient times and brought him here to modern day times, he'll probably be smarter than us. He'll adapt a lot better, be a lot smarter than us, and so on. And it's the same. Like, so warriors we human beings, whether we live in the Stone Age or now, the warriors have to be smart.
Absolutely.
Cunning. As there is.
Well, well, Gurdev, we're running out of time, but
that's good. It's nice talking to you.
It's always great talking.
Outside, they're waiting for me now.
And it's great. And we'll find out when this COVID stops, and hopefully next year we can bring you down to Texas for you to.
Yeah, by all means, like, yeah. I have one of my students in Houston. I don't know how far that is from you.
Houston from here is about 7 hours from Laredo.
In terms of flight or car?
No, car. Flight's about an hour, 45 minutes. You're probably going to wait longer in the airport than flight.
Yeah, we might drive down there. We'll see. Like, okay, nice talking to you, Paul.
Something to bring you down, and let's just let this all dissipate a little.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. We're in the same boat as the rest of the world. Anyway, nice talking to you. Have a great day.
Peace.
And so on.